Good afternoon, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Camp, Director of Public Policy here at the Ames Chamber of Commerce for our March 29th weekly legislative update. Before I get into the the policy and advocacy pieces down at the Capitol, I wanted to first start by saying that this next week, April 5th, will constitute the second legislative funnel, and that's really just to help pare down legislation and kind of make sure that the priorities are moving forward and some of the non-priority bills are kind of dying, for lack of a better word, in the legislative session through these funnels. So what the second legislative funnel does is it says that Senate bills have to be out of House committees and House bills have to be out of Senate committees. If they are not, they are then dead for the remainder of the session. There are exemptions to the funnel deadlines and requirements, however, though. Government ethics and oversight bills make it through regardless of funnel. They're funnel proof, as are appropriations bills, Ways and Means bills, and leadership bills. So things like the Empower Rural Iowa Initiative and the Future Ready Iowa, because those are leadership bills coming from the governor's office. So those all make it through the legislative funnel as well. So we want to make sure we're watching bills that may not be able to make it through those funnels, but most of the bills that we are watching at this time will be making it through. But it is important to note that that legislative deadline of the second funnel is coming up on April 5th. So expect next week to be a pretty busy one down at the Capitol. Getting into the political and legislative side of things with particular pieces of legislation, there was one tax bill that came out this week, and it's not the tax bill we were necessarily anticipating. We've been closely monitoring, as well as our friends at the city and the county, the property tax bills that have been moving forward in the House, but the Senate has yet to release a tax bill. So we've been closely watching the Senate Ways and Means, and this particularly their chair, Senator Randy Feenstra, to see when a bill may be coming out regarding property tax from the Senate and the Senate Ways and Means Committee. That is not this week yet. He did release a bill, but it was not that bill. We will continue to watch very closely for the property tax bill because that could have some major impacts for our friends at the county and the city. But on a different note, he did come up with an income tax cleanup bill. What that bill would really do is it would take last year's income tax reform that they were able to achieve and really just clean up a few specific things that the senator really thought needed to be touched on and improved, as any tax bill you'll find with any tax bill of that size and magnitude. What some of the provisions are that he's trying to do some amendments to, and what, just again as a reminder, this is regards to income tax. It's first altering the targeted jobs withholding pilot to targeted new jobs instead of retained jobs. So instead of looking at the retained jobs for that targeted job withholding pilot program in IEDA, they would then be looking for the new jobs, similar to the differentiation between the 260E and F programs for job trainings through the High Quality Jobs program. Second, it appears to extend the research activities credit, a credit that we are really strongly and passionately a proponent of, and we really defend whenever any opponents try to go after the refundability and any of the mechanisms going into that tax credit. It looks at possibly adding to the research activities credit agri-science or agricultural animal production. We still need a little bit of clarity as to what that would mean, but being at the northern hub of America's cultivation corridor, anytime we hear additional resources being provided for agri-science and animal health, that's obviously something we are very much interested in because that's such a huge target industry here in Ames and for Iowa State and within Story County and throughout all of America's cultivation corridor. So we will continue to monitor that bill, and we will also continue to monitor whatever may come out of the Senate for property tax, because obviously, as I mentioned before, that's a very critical issue as well. Another bill that came out in the Senate this week is the Economic Development Appropriations bill. And the Senate has released theirs. The House, we haven't seen anything yet. The one thing that really jumped out about this bill is the cash fund balance for Iowa Economic Development Authority would drop from $15.9 million down to $11.85 million. That's really about a $4 million hit, which is very much a concern to us, because even though there are additional funds being provided for things like Future Ready Iowa and the Employer Innovation Fund and the Last Dollar Scholarship, that $4 million hit to the case fund would really hurt if that is in fact what gets passed and signed into law. It is important to note that we haven't seen anything from the House in this regard yet. So what we're hearing is that the Senate and the House are not on the same page on this, as they are in a lot of different things. This just being one of those cases, and we've heard that the House's bill may be a cut of about $2 million, which is still not ideal, but still that would be about half of what the Senate is proposing. So we will closely monitor this because that IDA appropriations bill and that money going into the case fund is really, really critical to what we're doing here. Think the major projects that we've seen in the last year and a half, with the most recent one being Vertex, Burke, 3M, the like. Those are the kind of projects that are going through these case funds. So we always are very, very closely monitoring those and making sure that they have the necessary resources put towards them so that great companies such as those and many others that we're assisting can make sure that they're receiving the assistance and resources they deserve. Empower Rural Iowa is another one that we're continually watching very closely. And what that really does is it really just strengthens and changes the workforce housing program. It increases the funding from 20 million to 25 million. It increases the rural set aside, or the amount that has to go to rural communities, from 5 million to 10 million. It also makes the workforce housing program a competitive program, which is very, very important because there was a massive backlog under the previous program and previous makeup. So that's something we really want to see is it made competitive. And then it also makes changes to broadband policy, which is really important as we look at incentivizing and moving forward in broadband expansion throughout the state. It would put in $10 million is the proposed amount from the governor, and then that would hopefully incent with federal and state dollars, with federal and other public-private dollars up to about $100 million. So that would be something that would be very, very important to build on. So we continue to monitor that bill and be supportive of it. Lastly, the SAVE extension. The House passed the SAVE extension, or the penny sales tax for school infrastructure, 96-3 on March 13th, and it now awaits debate by the Senate the Senate Ways and Means subcommittee, of which Senator Cornbach is sitting on, so we can always make sure that we're keeping up to date on what's going on with that with our local senator here. And that was assigned on Tuesday. And it has positive momentum and is expected to pass in the coming weeks, but we will continue to monitor it, as that was one of our priority bills going into the session, as we know how supportive and helpful it is to our local community school districts, who we are very strong partners with. So with that wraps up the policy side of things I wanted to talk about. Once again, just please come back next week for our April 5th update. That one will have quite a bit of content because, as I mentioned, it's the second legislative funnel. So there's always a lot of activity that week. So please come back and join us next week for the April 5th update, and have a very nice rest of the day and a nice weekend.